Hey everybody, welcome back to another build challenge video. This time we'll be taking a look at my mech Harvest Moon, which is centered on making a build challenge on the NGI 28 Coral Shield. We'll start off by talking about the Coral Shield, its unique pluses and minuses, and then we'll talk about the build synergy, then I'll jump into PvP and specific matchup techs. I do also want to mention something on this build now, which is that I do think that the Coral Shield is overdue for a buff. They went a little too hard on the nerf that it used to have back when it was like 90% reduction and like 80% reduction damage and impact respectively. Now it is, at least until they fix the impact and accumulative impact ratios of the weapons, 57% impact dampening basically means you get no impact dampening when you factor in that weapons will be reduced based on their impact value rather than their accumulative impact, and it'll net zero, basically allowing them to build up their accumulative impact. There are some exceptions, like rifles, for example, are worse to block with this shield, while something like the Haldmen is better because the accumulative impact is closer to the impact value. In general, most weapons tend to be around 2 to 1 though, and so this shield net zeros that. The way to think about this shield, I think, is that it is more about making damage reduction. It also has a long IG window and also is pretty close in its non-IG. So I think the way you think about this shield is you do your best to parry attacks that are like big nukes and whatnot, and take advantage of that IG damage mitigation when you can't dodge them. The downside of the Coral Shield is that it makes your hitbox very large, and this becomes particularly noticeable for when you're trying to parry missiles. You don't want to do that. You'd rather just use passive dodging or QBs to completely negate those and nukes, as it's not worth taking the impact buildup. But what the shield is really good for is the fact that you can fire your left-hand weapon while it's up. So what we are going to try to do with this build is make a build that is able to put out more DPS per second when you factor in our shield using our left-hand weapon and our right-hand weapon. Now that said, that means that you need a weapon that fires over time rather than burst, as you want to make sure your weapon's taking advantage of the long IG window of the NGI shield. And if you just go for burst, you're better off just taking a burst weapon than parrying right after or right before. It's like the PV buckler or whatnot. So what this weapon is good for is protecting a weapon that takes a while to dump its magazine, and allowing you to fire both of those at the same time. Fortunately, with this build, we actually have the ability to fire all three weapons at the same time, which will come in later when we get to the combos. But I do think assault rifles are also overdue for a projectile speed buff and for the resistances to formula to be revamped to average and ideal range and effective range rather than just effective range. But that said, I didn't want to run the etsijins, and these rifles actually do work out pretty interestingly because we actually can play the fact that we have higher kinetic defense and better range stats than the etsijins, and if you can keep the fight outside of like point blank range, you'll actually end up getting a more favorable trade than them, despite their better projectile speed, because not only are you mitigating their damage, so even if they do win the stagger race, you usually haven't taken that much damage by the time it gets to that point, but you're doing better damage per second relative to them with the shield up, and you also have better range, so you can hit them at a range that they can't hit you with deflects. Now that range is further than I would like, to be honest, especially because our projectile speed is worse than the etsijin, but all the same, it is there. Okay, so that's what the Coral Shield basically is. It is more about damage per second reduction for you, less so than impact, as you actually end up taking bonus impact if you're outside the parry windows. So that isn't to say you shouldn't use it, because this build has other tools to manage impact, but you're mainly just trying to keep the shield up to block attacks that you aren't able to dodge reliably. It's also really good that it blocks vertical missiles like the vertical plasma ones. So another really handy thing is the shield's completely around you rather than just in front of you. You are going to have to manage its cooling stat using the EULE launcher. So I think that's a good time to just jump into the rest of the build breakdown rather than just the Coral Shield. So the Coral Shield can be deployed twice, plus one if you're willing to overheat it, but we usually don't want to do that. So what we do in order to buy us more breathing room, and also to help us manage the fact that this isn't great at impact reduction, is we're going to use the EULE launcher. We can hide behind it in order to create windows where we can try to get some impact regeneration started. Even if we don't get the whole thing back, it's fine. You're just trying to get like bits and pieces here and there, or if they're slower, you can take advantage of the EULE's assault boost thrust to get away, and then turn around, fire the shield launcher behind you, intercept all the missiles, which are really good at blocking like anything that's basically straight shot, including duos if they're not too close. Like if the missile travels in a straight flight path, you can actually intercept these missiles with the EULE launcher, and then allow you to just continue on a straight back, a more efficient trajectory to get as much space as possible. We are looking to keep 350 boost speed so that we can grace dodge missiles without needing to spend energy. We can just passively move around them. Be very careful not to have the coil shield up, as it will make your hitbox too wide, and then you will end up taking those missiles anyways. So you'll see that in some of the PvP matchups, like when to use the shield, when not to. The EULE launcher is also great for rushdown builds, as it basically insta-staggers almost anything in the game with the amount of impact that you're putting out here. It's also really good at stripping off pulse armor, so when they go to pop their pulse armor, try to be close to them enough that you can land the EULE launcher and just fire all three and immediately either get a direct hit punish, which will be massive, or you can strip off their pulse armor if you're a little late, which is also good and will usually almost insta-stagger them as well. It's a really funny interaction. It has a very high PA interference as well, so that's multiplying the amount of impact we're doing against the impact shield of pulse armor. And it's going to strip it completely off and usually leave them, if not staggered, then very close to. It's also part of our stagger punish, so if we do stagger them, you can just continue to fire the assault rifles while dumping all three of these into the opponent. The range is a little finicky. You can see my EULE launcher build challenge video if you want some more definitive breakdowns, but in general, I just say like around 80 meters is kind of what you're looking for. You can actually go as far as 90, and I think the close range detonation is a little generous too. Yeah, 60, it just shuts it down. So 65 would be your inner range, and then I would just say around 90 at the max. But you'll just get a feel for it. You don't really want to look at the meter every time. You're just trying to stay roughly in this range where it looks like you're this close. And what the nice thing about it is that you can dump all three while continuing to assault rifle punish too. It will knock them away if it staggers them, but if they're already staggered, it won't push them out of the way, so that PA shield there that was left there will not end up blocking your assault rifle shots. When deciding whether or not to use the coil shield for blocking certain attacks, one thing to be really mindful of is the impact versus the accumulative impact ratio. Now, the vast majority of weapons are going to have something like a 2-to-1 ratio. However, there are exceptions, like the Rensetsus, the Harris, and the Curtis have what is effectively a 3-to-1 ratio. So parrying these is actually a net negative in terms of impact. Yes, the damage is valuable, so depending on the matchup, if you can control the range and either flee to safety or get your impact regenerated based on if there's cover on the map or whether or not you can effectively use the EULEs to block their entire payload, a consideration would be like if they have vertical plasmas, it's going to be very hard to try to hide behind things, so you might need cover for that. It's worth evaluating whether or not the damage block is worth the extra impact takeoff. On the flip side, what kind of weapons is the coil shield really good for parrying? Well, any weapon that has less than a 2-to-1 ratio is going to be effective at blocking impact. So a good example would be the Haldmen. At 280, 360, it's not quite a 2-to-1 ratio, so you're getting a net effect. It's worth keeping up the shield pretty much all the time to block the Haldmens because you're getting the passive damage, and then just cycling it whenever you feel like you can block an extra burst of damage, like if they have other weapons with this that they're going to stack on, that might be a time just to refresh the coil shield, but leaving it up to block all the Haldmens is a net win for you. The Zimmerman, however, not so much. You will be having a wider hitbox, and so you're going to be taking the full damage, the reduced damage and the full impact. So this one, it's not to say it's not worth blocking it, but it's more valuable to try to get some of the IG blocks in order to help mitigate some of the impact buildup. That said, outside of block, you're still getting the damage, and you are effectively reducing the impact to just its accumulative impact, so it's still a useful tool. You just don't necessarily want to take all the hits. You may want to try to dodge some of the Zimmermans more often and only use the shield in between your energy regenerations. Sweet 16, same thing. This as the Haldmen, it's actually a better ratio. And then the coral weapons, anything coral damage is 100% impact to cumulative impact, so it's always worth blocking as long as you're going to take the hit anyways. Like if you can't dodge the attack, then blocking it with a coil shield, even outside of IG, is going to be net worth it. A lot of the bazookas do not run 2-to-1 ratios, so these are worth mitigating if you can't block it. The proximity det can be really deceptive on the Majestic, and a lot of times I find them catching these even if I tried to dodge it. So I think it's probably worth just trying to block these more often than not, rather than trying to dodge them with QB every time. That said, bazookas hit hard, and so the impact will add up quite quickly. So you may need the ability to flee, and hopefully the map will give you some cover areas where you can shelter in. What other ones are worth mentioning? The flamethrower, even though it does have a disincentivized ratio, the damage of it is definitely worth mitigating, so I would definitely block those. Stun guns for sure, because of the status block, those are definitely worth it. And then laser weapons, even though the impact ratio is off, the at least in a lot of cases, the damage reduction for lasers is their main, like the damage is their main tool, and so reducing that I think is net worth it. I'm just going to see if there's any very interesting ones here that may stand out. The laser pistol is very interesting because it's very close to a 2-to-1 ratio. Plasma, always worth blocking. You can see that ratio there on the PR. With the nebula, it is definitely worth blocking, so I wouldn't change anything there. Shield strippers, not worth blocking. The impact buildup on these is going to be too severe. So to give you an idea, this does 224 impact at 10 shots per second. That means it's only 240 impact, but when you factor in its PA interference of giving it a 5.37 multiplier, you're looking at 1288 impact before mitigation. So you'll end up having about 600. I would be split on this. If there's two of them, probably not, but if it's only one shield stripper, I think you could probably justify just blocking those for the damage reduction, as these are largely a damage weapon as well. So yeah, just worth noting, coral weapons, anything with ratios of impact to cumulative of less than 2 are very valuable to block. However, there are some exceptions to consider just because they're purely damage, and even though the ratio is off of it, blocking the damage is more valuable. Okay, talking about the build parts now, essentially what we're looking to do is get as tanky as possible while maintaining 350 boost speed. We want as much stability to buy us as much room with our shield as possible, as well as much stats as possible to really leverage our ability to play the AP race rather than the stagger race. This build is, in general, I would say, designed to avoid the stagger punish as the center of the battle and really try to make it into a damage over time build that just shuts down any attempts to take advantage of impact by either staggering them first and flying away, or getting the punish while backpedaling to do both. Or you can hide behind the EULE launcher to create lots of opportunities to regenerate impact. Or finally, you can always just assault boost away with a super high S tier assault boost thrust that the EULE has. I do think that they'll probably nerf the thrust on EULE eventually, probably setting it closer to the Flugel, in which case you can always swap to the gills. It will still have really good stats and good QB, which helps us to dodge certain attacks that we don't want to be blocking with the shield. But another notable mention would be the SPD booster. It really depends on what they do in the next patches, but largely what you want to have is really high boost speed, good assault boost thrust, and then the QB reload stats are nice if you can get them. If you can't, that's okay. We have the shield helping us out and the shield launcher helping us out for that, but it is nice to be able to rapidly reposition. So as long as they give that to me, I'm going to take it. In terms of the frame parts, I kind of already mentioned, just looking for as much kinetic defense as possible, although an averaged defense is kind of the goal here to win the AP lead on all fronts. The one other thing that I think is kind of noticeable other than the stability is the jump distance. Having really good jump distance is nice because it lets you get out of range out of things and also gets you the ability to get back to your shields. Like once you've launched them, you usually don't want to fly away from them. You want to try to orbit them, blocking a lot of their attacks while your assault rifles are just steady fire and chipping them every time you're not behind it. But also creating opportunities for them to run into the EULE launcher again. That's another major thing. But that also helps you give your coral shield time to cool. Every time you're hiding behind the EULE launcher, you drop it and get some regeneration started, or at least start the timer, forcing them to get aggressive and burn off battery to try to reposition quickly before you do start. Going to run the Walt FCS for good close range and strong medium range. Again, I do think this is due for a nerf and medium range assist. If that does happen, you could swap to the Talbot and just take advantage of soft lock at medium range. But for now, as long as they haven't nerfed this overpowered FCS, then we'll take advantage of it. Don't really need the FCS lock on, funny enough. If they nerf close range and medium range becomes more of a factor, you could also potentially look at the PO5 because of our jump distance. But that's really going to depend on what they do on nerfs. VP20C is just a great lightweight generator, helping us stay underweight enough to stay at that 350 boost speed. It also has the 1230 post recovery EN supply, so when you burn out your whole battery in the air, it's a bit like a lot of builds do this to get away from you. They'll just stay up in the air, but then you get another 1200 in the air, which lets you kind of play like a permaflight build. This gives us the ability to chase them, so that is why we're running that generator. We could also consider the Ming Tang, but I'd have to make some energy supply compromises, and also it wouldn't really give us an option for aerial chase down, so we're going to stick with the 20C. Expansion-wise, there is a good argument for assault armor, but once I realized that, I can just strip their pulse armor by dumping the EULE launcher into them, it really gave a strong case to run pulse armor on this build and give us the ability to reset the stagger window before we get staggered one time. Especially if we make like an early mistake, it's nice to have that option, and knowing that we're going to negate their pulse armor anyways, even if they do try to like pop it off. This basically means that we have a similar effect to having assault armor for countering their pulse armor while still getting a pulse armor of our own. So that's kind of why that happens. The HAL arms are good for recoil control as well as firearm specialization still being strong and giving us good defensive stats. All of that is stuff we need. So you do need a minimum amount of recoil control in order to full auto weapons like full auto weapons that fire fast. We have just enough to be able to fire this weapon without any recoil bloom for the entire magazine, which is kind of the thing. So it's nice that we managed to take advantage of firearm spec in the same breath too. Normally, in order to recoil control full auto weapons, you'd have to give up some firearm spec. But the assault rifles are a little bit slower than the etsijins, which is nice. And if we were running double etsijins, I can't remember if these have enough recoil control. Let's double check. Yeah, these also are able to control because of the burst fire effect. Other SMGs would not. That's another thing that really kind of needs to be nerfed. The Etsijin definitely needs a recoil. In addition to like so many nerfs, effective range needs a drop, projectile speed needs a drop, and the recoil needs to be buffed. Increased and make the weapon worse. But until they do that, we're nothing really to say until they make those changes. But anyways. That basically covers the build. We managed to get just under 1800 stability. All of our defenses are over 1200. I would have preferred to be able to chip a bit more into kinetic if I could, but it just wasn't in the cards without making more dramatic changes or compromises elsewhere. The headpiece is just good all around. Mind Alpha core is good all around. The HAL arm unfortunately doesn't give us great kinetic defense, but it's more valuable to have the recoil and firearm spec, I would say, as well as good stats. So that was kind of forced. I guess you could consider the Melander arms. I don't remember if these have enough recoil. No, these do not have enough recoil. That's why I had these arms on. So yeah, you're kind of forced here to take the energy defense, the kinetic defense weakness, but we make up for it with the legs at least a little bit. So that's how the build breaks down. Okay, so the strategy for Etsijin, Nach, EULE, so I call them orbit builds. The general goal here is to try to get as close as possible while taking no missile damage. Here I make a bit of a mistake. I start moving forward before the vertical plasmas have dropped by me, but the way to dodge vertical plasmas is to start having upward thrust and not be moving towards them. Otherwise you're going to pull the missiles into a backwards trajectory. And then the front ones, you just move up and to the right. So our general strategy here is to get into that sweet spot of range where either their etsijins are deflecting, depending on how good their movement are, or if they're really good at making you or throwing off your FCS, you're going to need to get a little bit closer and agree to trade some of the damage of the etsijin into your assault rifle. We're leveraging our ability to block the etsijin with the coil shield and mitigate the damage, our larger AP pool, and our ability and our higher resistances. As well as their fragility in order to get the health lead, even though they land more bullets. Once we do that, ideally the map isn't a terrible map roll and you have some cover with which you can force them to start rushing into you, which you can always use the shield as soon as they come around the cover. But in this map I don't have that option. So when you have that option, just realize you're probably not going to win the first stagger race, but you might be able to shrug off enough of the damage throughout the fight that you're going to survive their stagger. They're not going to be ready to survive your punish because of the assault rifle's passive chip the whole match. One thing that's going to be crucial though is landing the pulse shield launcher in order to neutralize their pulse armor and give them a bunch more damage and get them very close to stagger again. If you miss that opportunity, a lot of times the map can be over. Depending on your opponent and how wise they are, if you can get the fight into the air, you can take away a lot of their energy options. So trying to play for some more verticality is going to be net in your favor. They will win the initial bit of impact and damage race, but the thing is they are much more dependent on being able to get their energy back than we are because of our shield. So that is going to be another fact that you can take advantage of. They don't want to be cubing in the air. It puts them in a vulnerable position. Here, as soon as I get the health lead, I end up taking shelter, and I just use I take away their missile tools, or at least a lot of their pressure here. They can manual aim their plasma missiles into the ground in here, in which case you have to be ready to dodge out. But again, we can still poke every time they come around with the assault rifles, and if you use the shield efficiently, where you're not taking the missiles for free, but you are blocking the etsijin, you can create a net health trade win in your favor. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. You'll notice that while they are using the etsijin with a better projectile speed, I end up still, like as a percentage, my health is going down slower than theirs. So that's going to be how you end up taking advantage of the assault rifle's range, as well as your tankiness over the etsijins on lightweights. Keep in mind that very good opponents are going to be able to throw off your FCS, and you won't be able to leverage the lack of projectile speed, or they will be able to leverage the projectile speed of the etsijin better than you. But at least this gives you a strategy for the matchup to try to take advantage of the weaknesses in there and have a means to beat that meta as long as you pilot very well. And probably if they make some mistakes. But yeah, I messed up the pulse strip there, which is unfortunate, but ends up not mattering because they don't play aggressive enough. If they had, I would have deployed this shield and just agreed to trade. Try to take away projectile speed by just getting it in very close and point blank, and don't even bother dodging. Just keep holding the trigger, let them dump into your shield because they're not going to miss anyways, and try to leverage them into just agreeing to trade, because if they QB, they can dodge your assault rifle, but they don't get any offense. If they don't QB, they get all their offense, but they're going into your shield and you're hitting them much harder that way. The various elevator builds, largely this one's just about poking them with the assault rifle. The fact that they're so slow, they aren't going to be able to do much about your assault rifle just steadily building up impact. I would say the main thing is just to pay attention to their missiles, know all of the dodge patterns for all the different missiles, and don't take them for free. You're going to want to just get the health lead. Ideally, the map has some cover options for you, and you can use that to negate all their missile tools. This time I got lucky. I did have some options for the soup missile, but depending on your map roll, you may have to play it more aggressively and just stay on the ground getting your energy back while forcing them not to, and just it's more important to dodge their missiles than it is to land assault rifle bullets, so focus on that. You can also use the EULE launchers to create cover on maps that do not that don't offer it. As long as their build isn't really a rushdown build, you can instead use your EULE launcher to create cover for opportune moments where you really want to get your stability regenerating and whatnot. And then again, be careful about blocking the missiles with the shield, because you're going to eat all of them, no grace dodging if you do that. So try not to have the shield up when large missile streams are flying towards you. All right, double Zimm PS shields and other double Zimm builds. This goes for the pulse blade options too. So the EULE launcher is actually one of the strongest shutdown tools. Again, you can see my video on that build challenge if you want more in-depth talking about the EULE launcher and some specific strategies. But this matchup is really just our kind of our specialty, because we have the ability to make them have to take less efficient paths to rush down to us. They have to spend a lot of energy getting around the EULE launchers. So if they ever do run into them, it can often turn the fight around, even if you're losing the stagger race. In those cases, I think it's less important to go for the stagger punish and just assault boost away, depending on their missiles. But even if they are running straight shots, a lot of times you can just assault boost away, turn around, and either dodge or fire the shield launcher behind you to intercept the missiles before they catch up. But that way you just get to reset your impact and turn the fight into more of a fight of attrition, which is what I'm kind of doing here. You will need to use the EULE to dodge some of the Zimmerman shots, by the way. Just keep that in mind. You can't just rely on the EULEs to do everything. It's a hybrid of using both tools to make the most of the mech. If you are pretty comfortable with your level of impact buildup, going for the stagger punish with a pulse shield launcher, if you're close enough to secure it, is great. And also you strip off their pulse armor, and then usually, because you're going to be so close and have used your shield launchers, it's best just to immediately pop pulse armor and don't give them the opportunity to stagger you and get some damage in that stagger punish. It's unlikely that you'll have enough time to get away if you've dumped all of your tools, and they've already closed the gap. So I would just say pop the pulse armor preemptively in those cases. Various orbit builds, especially etsijins, although in this case it's a Haldmen etsijin. The big thing here is really to just try to leverage your range advantage better. So most of the time, etsijin users are not going to be running medium range tracking FCSs. They're going to be running the Abbott, because even though they hit at 200, they do definitely often need to go a little bit closer. So try to play the fight at about 350 meters if you can, just to play the sweet spot of the assault rifles, where you're close enough that your projectile speed will get the job done most of the time, but not so close that you're giving them the close range assist advantage. You're trying to leverage your Walt after all. Hero is running assault armor. I kind of wish I wasn't, but this was before I realized the pulse shield launcher was just such a strong tool against pulse armor anyways, that you might as well just keep pulse armor for yourself too, and use the EULE launcher to strip their pulse armor off instead of assault armor. Also, that lets you just play a bit more at range. But yeah, leverage your tankiness, and again, the coral shield is really a deciding factor in getting the health lead. Keep in mind, this is not about getting the impact lead every time. It's about mitigating damage throughout the entire fight, such that you're basically giving yourself like an extra 40% AP in effect, right? Because their weapons are just doing about half the damage most of the time. And you accept the impact is largely not the main use of this shield, although it does have the ability, at least in its IG window, to mitigate a decent amount, just under 70%. But again, that's not really what the shield is mainly meant for. However, you will be taking more etsijin hits when you have the shield up, so I think playing the range game is the main, like just getting the sweet spot for the assault rifle is, until they buff assault rifle projectile speed and nerf etsijin, you really got to feel out what the exact range that you're basically landing your hits and they're landing theirs. That's kind of what you want to master with the assault rifles until they fix those imbalances in the game. Double melee, mainly just the EULE launcher is going to be putting in most of the work here. It's very critical in a lot of matchups to make sure you land some EULEs at some point in the match, and that means that you need to get the health lead early, ideally, in order to put them on the offense, giving you opportunities to set up the EULE. If you're on the offense because they've got the health lead and they're playing defensive, that really takes away a lot of the value of the EULE launcher, other than just its ability to add on stagger punish and strip off the pulse armor when you do manage to stagger them. But a lot of times those fights, you're not going to have the ability to get the stagger punish if you keep getting staggered, especially for rifle kites. So trying to get that health lead early is a very critical aspect of this build. But if you do lose it, that doesn't mean you're out of the fight. You have rifles as well, so you have the ability, and you're usually more tanky than rifle kites, so you can often assault boost and get that advantage for impact reduction while you chase down and let the assault rifles do their work. But back to double melee, the main thing here is just don't catch the combo. If you eat the charged pulse blade, just pop a pulse armor. Always try to save a little bit of energy before you pop pulse armor so that you can QB backwards when they try to assault armor cancel it. If they're running pulse armor, that's not something you have to worry about, but if they are running assault armor, then you will have to worry about it. All right, a variant of the other orbit builds. This one could go hand in hand with double pistols. Pistol SMG is roughly the same idea. They're going to be playing with a close range FCS, so you really want to keep it at 150 meters or just outside. The reason I say 150 rather than just over 130 is you want a little bit of wiggle room. You want to be able to like let them make a decision, get a little bit closer with some sort of movement like a QB, but then you have time to QB backwards as well. So you'll really have to feel it out with every matchup type and try to see where your weapons shine the most and when the trade starts favoring you. But and unfortunately that can mean you'll lose some matches while you learn. But eventually you'll just have it sort of like a map built down, and you'll be able to recognize based on the map what your sweet spot range is. I did not know they had assault armor at this time, but now that I do, I know that I need to plot my pulse armor a little bit more conservatively. And the range for me here seems to be just outside of 100 because the pistol it starts deflecting quite early, and we are running over 1200 resistance to kinetic. So you'll basically think about it as you'll start deflecting their shots at about 85% of the kinetic weapon's effective listed range. And pistols are just over 100, and then 90 I think is their ideal. So I would say just keeping the fight just at a close range is fine. You can afford to get a little bit closer in this case because of the pistol's limitations, but the SMG will be hitting you. So again, just outside of close range will maximize your MCS, and you want to try to toe the line though, letting the assault rifle get as close as possible. So that it is as reliable as possible and you're not too far away that you're hurting your own offense. Coral damage. So coral is an interesting matchup for this shield with the coral shield, just because of how efficient this shield becomes at reducing it. The fact that the impact is always worth blocking, IG or not, and the damage is worth blocking, IG or not, assuming you can't dodge the attack, or that the hitbox of the shield is not going to make you take hits you otherwise wouldn't. The coral shield's very efficient at coral fights, and so other than just landing the EULE launcher when they try to rush you down, there's not too much to say about that. And this is it for my build challenge Harvest Moon, trying to focus on the Coral Shield after its nerfs in a semi-recent patch. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share the video if you know anybody that might want to try some of these interesting build ideas out and keep the game a little fresh. I'll be working on a patch prediction video next, so stay tuned for that. Although I should probably call it more of a wish list. See you then.